Do y'all think Phaedra Parks' ears are burning? Because baby is the subject of a lot of tea this week. Okay. A whole lot of tea coming out about that good Miss Phaedra Parks. And we got to talk about it. But the majority of this conversation, okay, because as Phaedra says here, no matter the weather, tea is always best served best when hot, okay? And today the tea is piping hot because we gotta recap this interview that Kenya Moore did with Carlos King on Carlos King's podcast. I would have gotten this out to you guys a little bit earlier, but unfortunately, the lawnmower people decide that they want to mow the grounds today, and so we had to wait until there was a lot less noise and a lot less confusion going on. Okay, so we're gonna get into the tea about this interview, and I got my little cup of tea right here. If you see what's going on at the top around here, it's the way the tea is made, and there's cinnamon and a little bit of ginger around the rim. So cheers to you. Okay, so let's get into it. Now, first things first, I'm gonna take my time. So if you want to rush, sit down somewhere. Your life is too precious to be rushed anyway. So sat on down. Um, I want to say that I enjoyed this interview with Kenya Moore. I think that these sit down interviews with Carlos in person with the other person, I think is 10 times better. I think the energy is different. You can see the level of camaraderie, and you can see and tell that the interviewee opens up a bit more when they're in person. We start this interview off talking about how Kenya was raised. Baby, let me tell you something. The way Kenya talked about how her mama did claim that she didn't even have a daughter, tried to get her one of her earliest beauty pageant titles stripped from her by alleging that Kenya was an alcoholic. Oh yes. And reporting to the people that Kenya was in her teens dating an older man. Now, apparently, the man was about 27 years old. So, Mr. Man, wherever you are, shame on you for shame. For shame. Okay. So she had to go to bat to defend her title against the things that her mother was trying to do to ruin her life. That is crazy to me. Now, y'all know I don't even like to talk about nobody's elder mamas because you know how I feel about that. But I just that's very disturbing. And I don't think I knew all of that. I don't know if y'all did, but I did. All right. Now, with regards to the shows, they talk about the colorism aspect early on, and she says that she has faced that and she does see that on some of these shows. They reference Candace Dillard Bassett as another example of someone who is typically on the receiving end of that. But we don't really stay on that subject for too long. We go back to Real Housewives of Atlanta season 5, and we get a lot of season 5 tea that I felt like is interesting. And it really makes me want to go back and watch season 5. Like, let me know, we are trying to do the podcast, again. But I'm almost wondering if we need to go back and re-watch some of these Glory Days episodes of some of these housewives shows and recap them now in the present, if that might be a more fun podcast than sort of talking about like the hot topics that we talked about. New podcast is up right now on the Unfiltered channel. I'll put a link in the description. Kind of a pilot. We testing it out. So we may go in a couple of different directions on that. But essentially, Carlos was not producing on season 5. He was producing on season 4. And he said at the end, around season 4, he began to feel like something was missing. And so people were contacting him on a weekly basis about this Kenya Moore lady causing all of this commotion on the show, right? And so Kenya talked about the decision to leave, I guess, like Los Angeles and the whole acting and producing situation and really wanting to make a change for her life. And she talks about it being the same thing over and over, and she just needed something different. And she drove to Atlanta and decided to embark on reality TV. She talks about this Bible phrase that says, "Leap and there will be a net." And that is essentially what happened to her. She took the opportunity to move to Atlanta to start her life anew. And then Miss Lawrence told producers that she had moved to Atlanta. And apparently, she told Miss Lawrence that prior to all of this, in the development stages of Real Housewives of Atlanta, she heard about it, and she had told Miss Lawrence that Real Housewives of Atlanta would never work. So it's interesting that she thought it wouldn't work, but she ends up actually on the show. She talked about not liking Nene when she first saw her on the screen because she thought she was, loud, and, she just didn't like her personality. But that changed once she got on the show. And she does say that you have to get to know people versus what you see on TV. That is so true. I can definitely tell y'all from my own experiences that a lot of people have impressions of certain reality TV stars, and their persona in reality is actually much different than how they are portrayed. And Kenya does also shade the Bravo editors a little bit because she talks about, it viewers only see what the editors choose to show. And she talked about how she alludes to that happening a lot to her this season, really kind of calling out some things that the fans have been saying online about how she's being portrayed on the show in this current era. Now, they talk about how Real Housewives of Atlanta used to be the cat's meow in terms of, there was this element of exclusivity with who could join the cast, right? And that it was very difficult to get into. For instance, she filmed for a month without being an official housewife and without pay. She had apparently also walked away, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But she says back then, anyone auditioning went through a rigorous process. And if you made the cut, you would film with the housewife. Now, she apparently at that point in time knew Miss Lawrence, so she would film with Miss Lawrence. And that was sort of her introduction to the cast because Lawrence would invite her to events. Even though she didn't know the lady, she would still be getting invited. So she's doing all this filming. She's not being paid for it. Now, do I agree with that? I do think that there should be a very lengthy audition and testing process. I think that testing process for me would need to happen if I'm a production company. I'm testing while the show is airing, right? I'm not testing when it's time to actually go into production. We're testing if it's me, okay? If I'm producing, I'm testing new women and new couples. I'm testing them while the season is airing, okay? For the next season, because I need to know, and as Kenya talks about, she says that, now girls are just getting their contracts before they even meet the cast. And she says it blows up in everybody's faces when the new girls do meet the cast and they cannot keep up. To me, this is an example of a Sanya Richards-Ross, who is, again, likable, lovable, love Sanya. Not for this show, okay? Not for this show. And maybe she can grow to that space, as we have seen with her showdown with Sheree, which was everything to me. I mean, because I felt like it felt real in that moment. And I'm like, now this is what I need to be seeing on the show, a real moment. That argument should have taken place on the show. She talks about how, you needed to be tried and tested back in the day. And she talked about an event Nene had in season 5. And this is why I got to go back and watch season 5, even though I was watching it back then. But I think a critical rewatch is necessary at this point, because she talks about how in season 5, we got a lot of tea on season 5, I'm telling you. All these women were at Nene's event, And, you know, Kenya, I guess, took the mic at some point and says, now that we're done with this clown show. And she said that because she could not believe that she, who was a former Miss USA, was still in this audition process, because apparently at this event, there were a lot of other ladies in contention for whoever was going to get the peach. Mind you, they were only looking for one peach that season. Now, you guys may recall Cynthia talked about this as well, that her season, first season on the show, they actually, I think that they were going to try to make it between her and Phaedra, and they ended up choosing both of them. Now, she kept thinking to herself, she was offended that she was still a month in or so and still auditioning for this role, and she didn't have a contract. She also got into it with Cynthia, I think, around that same time, because she saw how Cynthia was like running around chasing after Nene and couldn't believe that this beautiful supermodel was chasing after this woman. And she was like, I didn't understand it, so I called it out. She says also, too, now when ladies come on the show, they are fans of the show. And, you know, she wasn't a fan at that point. You know what I'm saying? She had seen some episodes, but she wasn't like a super fan. You know what I'm saying? So Carlos was told that when the girls were filming season 5, that the girls allegedly went on strike against Kim. This goes back to some of the things that Nene has alleged about Kim and the preferential treatment that she was allegedly being given. Let me put up the alleged badge real quick. Okay. Now, we've heard this being spoken about before. So, you know, I mean, my question to you guys, this is my question to you.
Is it a coincidence? Is it a coincidence? I ask you. Is it a coincidence?
Is it a coincidence? Mm. That's a good question. That is a very, very good question. Okay. It doesn't seem like a coincidence, because the girls allegedly went on strike and decided that they weren't going to film for a week. I don't know if anybody knew that. Okay. Now, when the girls went on strike against Kim, Kenya clarifies that Porsha wasn't actually cast at that point. Kenya was cast at that point. And you guys recall that lunch where they all confronted Kim. Porsha was not at that lunch. And Kim ran off and she slapped the camera out she hit the camera or something like that. Something like that happened. That's when they casted Porsha, because they did not know what was going to happen with Kim. So she says that Porsha was a replacement housewife. No shade to Porsha, she does say. She said that none of the girls liked how Kim was receiving preferential treatment, so they were not going to work that week. So with a week off, they ended up calling her and Porsha to kind of come in and film together. And so they called her to come in and film at Porsha's event, okay? And she says that Porsha was very interesting at that point. And you guys may recall, Porsha was very interesting at that point. I think we could all kind of, she was a housewife. You know what I'm saying? And apparently they had lunch together, and she thought that, you know, Porsha was really sweet. But then when she got to the event, she said it was little things that was odd. Like, you know, the event was for a charity, but for some reason at the event, Cordell, I guess, was giving her a Chanel bag, which she just thought was just odd. Then she ended up getting upset with Porsha. It wasn't just that Porsha did not get her title correct, but it was the cavalier way in which Porsha reacted when she told her, like, oh, girl, it's whatever, you know, yada, yada, yada. So she said that she ended up going outside to kind of take a breather. And then she assumes that maybe a producer spoke to Porsha, and Porsha came outside and continued to, you know, that scene, and ended up, you know, insulting her and telling her to go to the curb where she belonged. And at that moment, that is when she got activated. Okay. So she says this happens to her a lot, where people don't always recall the things that have been done or said to her for her to then retaliate. So they end up calling her mean. She says that that really her and Porsha were born because the other ladies were on strike. It was two non-housewives shooting at the same time that actually, I mean, that had been unheard of because none of the housewives were actually filming. She was officially made a housewife after Nene's Living in Success event. I think that's what it was. And she remembered saying to production that she was done after that event. And they begged her to do one more scene because, again, she doesn't have a contract. Okay. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever heard Claudia Jordan talk about her story, but this is something similar to what happened with her. And she, I don't think, got her contract until really late in the game in the season. Okay. And the housewife was actually supposed to be Demetria. And Nene has echoed this and said, no, y'all picked the wrong girl. Y'all should have got Claudia after that read off in Puerto Rico. Okay. So she told them that, okay, if she did this one extra scene, if they didn't make her a housewife, then they could not use any of the footage that she had been in thus far. How about that? So really, at that point, I felt like they didn't really have much of a choice but to give her a contract. And I think it goes into this idea of knowing your worth. You know, as a person, I cannot say that I don't believe in working for free. I believe in working for free until you don't have to. Okay. And sometimes working for free allows people to see your value, right? It's kind of like interning. And for me, when I'm doing something for free and I know I'm not getting the same return that I'm putting into it, I'm doing it because I'm learning and earning at the same time. I'm doing it because for me, I know that it's advantageous for me to be in this situation and for me to get what I need to get from it so I can go to the next situation and then make my profit. So sometimes you cannot be short-sighted in your vision in terms of content that you put out there. It's the same thing I tell people when they want to get on YouTube. You are not wasting time for content that right now is getting 0 views because you keep putting out that content and a year later those things that got 0 views may have thousands upon thousands of views. So you put in the work, okay, sometimes, but you also need to know in those situations when to say when, okay? When to say enough is enough. And I think that Kenya Moore is a good example of like, okay, you know what? I've done this. I don't have a contract. I've been working. Y'all need to pay me, period. Okay. So I like that she made that reference. So they get into one of the things about her that triggered her. I think specifically with Phaedra was being called an alcoholic because, as you guys may recall, I told you in the beginning of this video that her mother had called her an alcoholic when she was trying to get that title, that crown taken away from her at a young age. Mind you, I think she was like 14 at this point. So to say she was an alcoholic, that's just like, ugh. So it was triggering for her when Phaedra called her an alcoholic, and she felt like, there were some mental things that she told, the mental issues that she told, confided in Phaedra, then that Phaedra then allegedly used against her to also say that she too has some type of mental things going on. So that had been a trigger for her. And that's why she has the opinion of Phaedra that she has amongst other things. So clearly she still feels a way about Phaedra, as does Kandi, but for her own reasons. She also says that she wasn't in a good place when season 5 began airing. As what happens with many people when they are sometimes put, especially into that villain role, I've seen it happen time and time again. When watching the season, she had to go see a therapist because one of the things that triggered her was in that, I think that first scene with her and Cynthia Bailey, and when she was helping with the runway show. It was a scene in which she says it appeared that she was being mean to another young Black girl, and that is not who she is. And she says that scene literally destroyed her, and she didn't answer the phone for a week when she saw that. And I think one of the producers had to actually go sit and talk to her for a couple of hours before she was okay again. She says that, it was fine that she was in the 2-bedroom, 4-star hotel that they later tried to portray as the ghetto with the white refrigerator. I know that you guys recall that. She says she got a good laugh out of that. It wasn't stuff like that. It was that moment of where it looked like she was being mean to those models. And I gotta go back and rewatch that scene because if I had time to, I would have watched it before I did this video to give you my real reaction to it, to really go back and see how it played out. But again, that might be a good podcast idea to kind of go back and rewatch those, old episodes, because that was the glory days, man. That was the glory day. What a time. What a time. All right. She says when asked, apparently when asked back for season 6, she was not going to go. Apparently Carlos had to fly out to, and I don't know if she went back to LA, but he had to fly out to LA, him and another producer. They met up with her and Brandon, and he convinced her to come back for season 6. And the executive producers, Kenya Moore says, the executive producers told her that she and Porsha saved the show. And she admits that she and Porsha made magic all these years. Now, they have come far when Kenya can admit that she and Porsha, they really did. I mean, that was frenemy ship right there. I mean, mostly enemies, but I mean, that was for a long time. They had been going and going and going at it. Okay. But she would give her number 1 challenger spot to Miss Lanithia Leakes. She gives her flowers. She says, you never knew where Nene was going to come from. And Nene gave as good as she got. And she enjoyed working with her. And she misses Nene on the show. And she says, Nene was a force all of her own, which I think we can all agree with. You know what I'm saying? I still feel like, I don't know if Nene was her number 1 challenger or if it was Porsha, because I felt like Porsha grew into a challenger for Kenya. And by the end, I felt like Porsha could give Kenya a run for her money. And so for me, I feel like it was Porsha that was Kenya's number 1 challenger. And I feel like it was Claudia that was Nene's. But that's just me. That's just me. That's just me. Y'all let me know, okay? Does she agree that Real Housewives of Atlanta is the house that Nene built? Kenya says that she built the house, but it got foreclosed on and she did not pay the bills. Okay. She says, do I agree with that? Well, I certainly think that that in those early seasons when Nene left, the engine continued to run. I mean, we go back to season 9. That was a huge season. And it was largely, I think, without Nene at all. So I just kind of feel like, can the show go on without Nene? Yes, but it takes a group effort to make it really good. And I feel like Atlanta has lost some of that level of exclusivity with the casting. And I feel like I agree. You need to cast and make these people work for that peach. And I don't feel like now people are having to work for that peach. I feel like they're getting on there and they're doing something, but they ain't work for it. You can tell that the other girls who have been there for ages don't really respect it. I mean, the core of that show right now is Kenya, Candy, Sheree, and Marlo. They've been there the longest. You know what I'm saying? Drew is giving us content, but I mean, Drew is her credibility is odd. It's just off the. I mean, I could do with Drew, but it's kind of like she's the best of what we got right now, and I don't know if that's the best, right? So anyway, she says that it makes her stomach turn when she does not get first chair. So we talked about this in our seating arrangements recently for the Real Housewives of Atlanta. And a lot of you guys in the chat were like, well, who cares? First, what does first chair mean? What does first chair mean? And I want to take this time because both Carlos and Kenya acknowledge this fact, okay? She says she brought it up to the executive last season when nobody understood that seating arrangement. Okay. And she said they would have never moved Nene's seat. They don't, and don't tell her it's about story. It's about who are the leads of the show. That's why Giselle, who they say is the star of Potomac, they say that Giselle is the face. This is them, Carlos and Kenya having a conversation. And Giselle has been put out as the face of the show, in my opinion, by the network. And I think she said that she even called the Potomac people one time and said, "Why is Giselle not in the middle?" I guess maybe of a photo or something like that. Um, she says that Nene didn't have story for like the last 3 seasons she was on. She was barely on the show, and she still got that same seat. Okay. She said Nene would come in and model her shoes and sit in the back of the room and not talk to nobody, and they would never move Nene. She feels like, Candy's fine sitting on the end because she says that her paychecks ain't gonna change regardless, right? But I think we all do know that it means something. Carlo confirms that it's who's the star of the show that season, and or in terms of the show in general, I should say. Like Giselle always gets that seat, it don't change. Kyle always gets that seat on Beverly Hills. Teresa always gets that seat on Jersey. Nene always gets that seat on Atlanta when she was on it. Bethany always got that seat when she was, especially in the latter seasons when she came back. There was no way that Bethany was not going to be in that seat next to Andy. And so I'm trying to tell y'all, it does mean something, okay? I don't know what they are trying to do in Atlanta, because Carlo asked straight up, is this a message to you? Kenya feels like, well, she feels like maybe it is, because she feels like her time on the show is not valued as it should be. She says, where are her spinoffs? When she was at the height of her time on the show, she said she was denied a spinoff about her having a baby. I think it was her having a baby, but then there was also the marriage. So, I think there was some of that. And she says, why was she not offered a spinoff? But she says she knows why, but she doesn't go into why. She said the show should always come first. And she says nowadays, she doesn't believe that the show is coming first. There's a part of me that feels like I agree. I think that there is something happening with Atlanta wherein someone is, I don't know if there's a grudge being held. I don't know what it is, but there's a part of me that feels like something is not being done in the best interest of the show. And I cannot figure out for the life of me what it is, why it is, who it's about. But there is something happening with Atlanta where it almost feels like, do you want the show to succeed? Because I think the fans could easily tell you, or anyone with ears, what should be happening. And we try week after week. I know that there are tons of creators out there out here who are screaming the same things, and I just don't get it. But apparently Kenya sees it too. It was asked, was she punished about, when she got married to Mark and did not show it on TV? Yes, she feels like, of course, she was punished. She says, is that a secret? But she says she understood both sides. She didn't want all the negativity that came with it because she had received that in previous relationships, and she's seen how these marriages have been affected by the reality TV thing. Look at Eva, look at Phaedra Apollo, look at Kim and Croy, look at Nene and Greg at one point in time. So many marriages have failed as a result of, being on. Well, is it the result of being on reality TV, or is it that reality TV exposes the cracks that were already there? Don't know. But she talks about how she dated one person, and they even, before the trailer came out, when the trailer came out, that person was featured, and the internet ran wild with the mugshots. And I'm like, that's the sort of thing that I don't really get into as much anymore, is like trying to dig into, like, I don't really want to know all these things about somebody's past before they get onto the show. Not because I feel like I don't want to know, because I am a little nosy, but and if it's in the news, of course we all talk about it. But I'm not hunting for it because I don't really care. I care about what happened on the show, right? Like, and that's where I'm at in this day and time, at least today, right? And so she talked about she didn't want to expose him on the show, and you know, when she did divorce ensued. But she also said she understood the network's perspective because they had followed her journey and this was something that she wanted. And now, as when she gets it, she doesn't show it, right? But apparently now he has his own reality show, allegedly. Um, he remembered, Carlos says he remembered that fist bump photo that appeared online of Kenya and Mark, and he kind of questioned, like, is this going to work out in the long run? And, you know, she talked about how she met Mark, and I think we've heard this story before. I guess through Chef Roble, and how she reached out to him, and they had their courtship, and they talked for hours at a time. Um, she talked about now in this divorce that he wants her to pay his bills and some other large payment that nobody understands what it is, and she would willingly pay that. But the problem that's holding things up is that he's trying to undo her rights to Brooklyn appearing on TV because he's doing a reality show, and apparently the show is actually a series that's actually filming in different locations. She says that he was allegedly upset about Marlo kicking the door, but he hasn't seen her but for 2 days in 2 years. So he's trying to trump up charges so he can get her to sign off to appear in his show, and that's what's holding up the divorce. So this is my question: is Mr. Mark Daly, if you haven't seen your daughter but for 2 days in the past 2 years, what are you trying to portray to the people on this show if your objective is to be able to show Brooklyn on the show? Because you ain't seen it if you ain't seen it in 2 days in 2 years, what's the point of even presenting her on the show as if you are always present? That seems a little odd to me. If we're believing what Kenya says, or if we are believing what Kenya is alleging, that makes absolutely no sense to me, because we've already heard that you've seen her in 2 days in 2 years. So if you show up on a reality TV show with her and she's looking at you like a stranger, then I don't really understand how that's going to benefit you at all, personally, unless you sold whomever on this idea that you would be able to show your daughter as part of the reason why you are there. I'm just trying to figure it out. Okay, none of these are allegations. This is conjecture. This is me contemplating and speculating about why this may be. Okay. Did the show ruin her marriage? She says no. Mark ruined their marriage. Okay. Now get into this is some extra tea, okay, about Phaedra. Now, the whole Walter of it all, because everybody goes back to that when we talk about Kenya Moore, and they talk about like alleged fake relationships. She clarifies that Candy verified that Kenya was dating Walter, but because of Phaedra perpetuating rumors, okay, it the notion that she paid for Walter to be on the show with her was perpetuated by, she alleges that it was perpetuated by Phaedra. Here is the tea that she revealed: that Nene called her and told her that Walter is going on the radio saying the relationship wasn't real, and that Phaedra has been retained by Walter, and Nene was giving her the heads up. Basically, she says that Phaedra was in cahoots with Walter. Nene spilled the tea to her, and that he had retained Phaedra, and that is when he went on the radio and said all that crazy stuff about their relationship. Okay? She says that she never paid that man, but she says that he never said that she paid for him to do this. He said that she asked him to be on the show, which she would have to do based on what we know about men or husbands or partners or boyfriends or significant others appearing on the show. You still have to ask them. They still have to sign off to be on the show. But somehow that turned into it being a fake relationship. She says she would put her hand on the Bible, and she realizes, though, that those types of rumors will always exist for housewives or girls on the show. And she gives examples of, she runs down the list of how something that someone says will always stick with, that person throughout their time on the show. Baby, let me tell you, this was only part one of the interview. We will get part two next week. But I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed this interview. I just felt like Kenya felt at home. I felt like she felt comfortable. I felt like they laughed. They got a good kiki out of it. The energy felt similar to when Nene was on. So I'm interested to see what we get next week. Let me know if you guys enjoyed the interview, what you believe, what you don't believe, what you appreciated. I want to know what your thoughts are down in the comment section down below. And I will, of course, catch you in the next